Hello again, everyone. It's Abra, and I'm back to give my 2 cents on Florida Man by Mike Baron. In case anyone's not aware, Florida is a bit crazy. In fact, it's so crazy and known for all its wacky headlines that the phrase Florida Man caught doing this or Florida Man caught doing that became a thing. So that craziness surrounding the Sunshine State is what inspired Mike Baron to come up with the graphic novel Here Before You, Florida Man. The premise of this story is you have the main character, Gary, and he's kind of like a ne'er-do-well. He has a good heart, but he's always up to something a little bit shady, trying to come up with a quick buck just so he can, have his drink, make his lady, Crystal, happy, smoke a little doob, have a good time. And he lives out down in the Everglades area of Florida. And he has a friend, his best friend, Floyd, is in pest control. And they both kind of get into shenanigans together. So lo and behold, his girlfriend, Crystal, who is quite the feisty gal, she ends up getting herself arrested, which seems to be a common occurrence for her, by dancing naked in the Waffle Hut and licking the manager. So that got her locked up. So now Gary's in a bit of a spot. He needs to raise money so he can go ahead and post the bail and get Crystal out of jail. The majority of the first part of the graphic novel sees Gary trying to come up with a way to get the scratch he needs to get Crystal out. And of course, along the way, nothing really goes as planned. He tries to go to a pawn shop. That doesn't really go well there. So he ends up going to a friend of his who's also a kind of sleazy attorney, Habib Rodriguez, to try to see if he can get some money so he can get Crystal out of the clank. And so they go on a stakeout and try to bust this one guy having an affair. More shenanigans ensue. So Gary passes out drunk, and so he has to try to find another way to raise money, which I guess one of the best ways to kind of think of a plan, see it come to fruition, is to go to the Waffle Hut, where breakfast is still only $5. So he ends up falling upon some luck. The Waffle Hut happens to be infested with bugs. So he calls up his buddy Floyd, the pest control guy, and they offer their services to spray. They end up finding a wig that allegedly was owned by the legend Burt Reynolds. So they decide to, he decides to try to hawk that. Somewhere along the way, he ends up deciding to get a lottery ticket because, as we all know, those that are in the worst position tend to waste all of their money on lottery tickets. But the 1 in a billion chance ends up striking. He ends up winning the lottery, 7 million to be exact. He gets to bail out Crystal, his girlfriend, and they end up getting hitched and buying this big mansion, and everything seems great, but it's kind of the lottery curse. He ends up blowing all of his lottery winnings, and he gets kicked out of his mansion for non-payment. He gets evicted. He gets kind of in a scuffle with the police because they were getting a little bit rowdy, drinking, doing some drugs. And when the police come to show up, his girlfriend, now wife, Crystal, ends up going ape on the cops because they're about to arrest Gary. And she takes a big black dildo that was a wedding gift and just goes ham on the cops. She ends up gaining a reputation that, I guess, the video of her attacking the cops with the huge black dildo went viral. And so she kind of gained a reputation for that. And so she goes to train to try to get some money by doing wrestling or wrestling matches. The story felt a little disjointed. I do like the dialogue that Mike Baron crafted for the characters. It's very funny banter. Again, going back to the story being a little bit disjointed, that could be because Mike Baron mentioned that he initially intended Florida Man, the stories, to be kind of a comic strip format. And then he mentioned that he ended up developing so much content that it made more sense to put it in a novel format, which is what he ended up doing. But some of the transitions from, I guess, scene to scene, if you want to say, are a little bit abrupt and feel a little bit strange. It flowed kind of like Florida Man headlines. So it was, what crazy thing would Gary get into next? So it's kind of like, here's another Florida Man headline. But at the end, it all does kind of come together, and you see how all these little side tangents that the story seemed to go on kind of weave back together. So that was interesting. The art for Florida Man 1 was, I thought, a little bit rough in spots. Then I looked at the artist. It looked like that there were 4 different artists, and I don't know if that might have had some impact on it. The art is serviceable, it works, but in some areas it's just a little bit strange. And there were a couple instances where it seemed like photographs were possibly used. This, I'm from the Daytona Beach area, and this looks a lot like a restaurant that was on A1A there. And in fact, it does say, I don't know if you can see on the post there, but it does say Atlantic Avenue, which is A1A. Moving on, we also have Florida Man number 2. This one, again, crafted by the wonderful Mike Barron. And this one, it looks like it had the pencils and layouts were done by Matthew Weldon. And I did feel that the art was a little more consistent in this book as opposed to Florida Man, which had 4 artists. The story essentially picks up not too long after the first one. There's a guy that's coming to visit Gary to get him on board with another scam because, again, Gary is, trying to find a way to make an easy buck. So the guy says, I have these tarantulas, these red-kneed tarantulas. He needed Gary to go down to Mexico, pick him up, and then fly back to Miami so he could bring him into the state. Crystal's back in full form. She is still following her dream of wrestling as the Black Dildo, but when she's wrestling, she can't use the name Black Dildo. She goes by the name Steely Danielle, kind of a reference to the band Steely Dan. And of course, Crystal being kind of a firebrand, she ends up getting all drunk and snorting coke. She goes to the store to pick up some great dinner. Ends up getting ticked off when she can't pay for her lobster and booze with food stamps. So she ends up going off on the employees there, chucks a big lobster at him, and goes off with the rest of her goods. And of course, the police catch up with her. So she's not having a good day. She gets locked up once again. And Gary, he decides to go on that trip to transport the red-kneed tarantulas. That, again, doesn't really go too well. And unfortunately, the red-kneed tarantulas bust loose on the plane. When they try to get everyone off the plane because the tarantulas were escaping, this psycho ends up blowing up the plane. Luckily, no one was hurt, and the spiders were taken care of, and Gary just narrowly escapes being busted by the authorities. Good old Crystal, she's back in the slammer there. Gary busts Crystal out. She has to go ahead and train for her next fight so they can try to raise some more money. And in the meantime, Gary gets into more shenanigans along the way. But again, his big heart comes into play. He ends up helping some people out. And the big story with Volume 2 of Florida Man is there's this giant hog that goes by the nickname Hogzilla that is just wreaking havoc through his old neighborhood with the mansion before he blew all of his lottery earnings. So he decides to go ahead and try to capture the hog. And again, as with the first Florida Man, you just see all these different twists and turns in the plot, and there's all these kind of side threads that all come together. And I really enjoy this one. I think it was an improvement over Florida Man 1. I'm looking forward to Book 3. Again, all around, I think it was an improvement over Book 1, although I enjoyed Book 1 a lot. But, it was great to see more of the characters. That's one thing that Mike Barron does exceptionally well, is fleshing out the characters, making him feel really believable. And I feel like I could just walk into Gary someday at the Waffle Hut, But yeah, I would definitely give these a recommend. So those are my 2 cents on Florida Man, Book 1 and Book 2. Very fun read.